So this tells you something about how economists roll, because Ed and I were like, let's just take a few minutes and people can relax, and Chris is like, get them back in their seats. It's time to get going. It's a pleasure to be here with you. As Ed said, I basically wear two hats. I'm a partner in a nonprofit I'll talk with you a little about. I write a weekly column on education for Time Magazine, so I kind of look at the world from those two different vantage points. So what I want to talk with you a little about today is some of the challenges we face in education, some ideas for how to address it, and just as somebody who does make his living working on these issues, I think it's terrific. You know, you heard a lot from Governor Belial. Education is a key part as we talk about these issues, whether it's the economy, whether it's connectedness, whether it's equality of opportunity, as Senator Warner talked about, it's a key part of that. So Bellwether, just to give you a quick idea of what we do, we're a nonprofit, we're a consulting organization. We do work for a variety of folks. We do a lot of work for state governments. We wrote several winning Race to the Top applications. We do a lot of policy analysis and review. We work for a lot of nonprofits. You know, this gives you a sense. We've worked with everybody from 60 Minutes, and we work with Sesame Street, to groups like the Achievement Network, which is an organization that works with teachers to help them use data more effectively. Teach Plus, which is an organization that works with teachers to empower them in the policy process. And a number of the sort of usual suspect foundations in our space, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We do a lot of financial modeling work, growth plan strategy work. We do some talent and recruiting and HR and that kind of work as well. So, as Senator Warner said, you know, Virginia's been a leader on education. Virginia's standards, when states were in the 90s, when states were adopting standards, Virginia was looked at as a leader. The standards of learning were one of the sort of early pushes, and were part of that big sort of, really was led by the South to sort of start adopting statewide standards, and you had this happening in different ways in a number of states in the region. And you can see Mark Christie, a former president of the Board of Education, talking about the 21st century, and that we can't have a system where it was just the lucky few, had to be everybody. Although we used to talk about the 21st century, what it's going to be like in the 21st century, but as you all know, we're into it now. And the economy is changing. I agree with Governor Belial's, like, there isn't as much change in some fundamental things as people think, and I bristle at some of the talk about 21st century skills, but there's no doubt our economy has changed. What it takes to be successful has changed. And you can just basically see, I mean, more and more of our jobs, about 4/5 of our jobs require skills beyond high school, some kind of post-secondary. Right now, 43% of Virginia adults have some post-secondary training. That's a gap. Some of that's a generational gap that's we're going to close, but some of that is a skills gap that we need to think about. So as we think about Virginia education, you have to keep two ideas in your head simultaneously, and I think we haven't done a very good job of that necessarily as a state and as leaders in the state. One of these is, look, we have many hardworking teachers, school administrators, and school system leaders. They work really hard. We have great schools in many parts of the state. We're way ahead of other states. Our higher education system, you're lucky to be a citizen of this state despite the problems, the varied opportunities that we have here in public higher education around the state. I'm a product from kindergarten on through 2 graduate degrees of public schools in this state. I think they work very well. But my story is an anecdote, and the plural of anecdote is not data. And we also have to look at this in a more macro sense. And I suspect many of us around the room who are from Virginia had good experience with the public schools. We need to also be able to look beyond sort of our experiences and so forth and step outside and look at some of the data. And that's what we're going to look at a little bit this morning, because the second idea you have to hold on to is we're not doing well enough, particularly for some groups of students, and we need to do substantially better. So this chart, you look at these 3 numbers and you wonder what they represent. Very simply, 77% of all 9th graders. That's what we can expect to graduate from high school in Virginia, 77%. So if you think about that, if you visit an elementary school and you look at like the school that my kids go to, about 100 kindergartners in the school, you look at that, it's only 77 of them overall are going to get out. But if you look at the kids who are African American, 65%. So 6 in 10, looking at those kindergartners. 70% when you're looking at Hispanic students. And those gaps should obviously trouble us, because that's, you know, about 1 in 5 overall, more than that for minority students, are not getting the very, very bare minimum credential that you need to enjoy success, basically have some choices in your life and some kinds of opportunity in this economy. We also have students who are graduating unprepared. An analysis by Achieve, 24% of graduates from our high schools end up in college needing some kind of remediation, so about 1 in 4. And this should trouble us because we know, and you can see over here, it's on your right, we know that the 8-year graduation rate at the high school level is dependent largely on whether you're coming in needing remediation. If you need remediation, you are substantially less likely to finish in 8 years. So getting kids as they're coming through the pipeline, elementary and secondary education, is the best way to help them get prepared, get set up for success in higher education. This has consequences for individuals. You know, we talk a lot about, and you can see over here, different earnings. And I think the big takeaway, just the key thing to think about there is those gaps are growing. So the gaps to higher skilled, so you have a bachelor's degree, you have a master's degree, a professional degree, and even an associate's degree, those bars are going to be getting longer. That's the trend. The returns to some college, no degree, just a high school diploma or less than a high school diploma, those are declining. So that gap is growing, and as we talk about inequality and social mobility, that's what it looks like. But the other side, you know, we're coming out of this, starting to come out of this, this downturn we've been in, and Virginia, thankfully, has been somewhat insulated from that, as Senator Warner said, because of our economy. But unemployment was not, we kept talking about this overall unemployment number, and that's what we report, and that's what, when it comes out, that Friday when it comes out, that's what the news reports. It's not, that number obscures as much as it reveals. Unemployment has remained, even in the worst of this downturn, much lower for people with advanced degrees, just for college graduates, people with associate's degrees, much higher for those with less skills and less education. So it matters to individuals. It also matters to all of us. Just a couple of quick facts. $5.3 billion in extra earnings if every state got to a 90% high school graduation rate. $5.3 billion. That would $6.6 billion in additional GDP, $1.8 billion in additional tax revenue. That's around the country that would come into state treasuries. That's just state tax revenue. $19 billion in additional home sales by the midpoint in these people's careers. And just the granular stuff that makes our economy run, $669 million annually in vehicle purchases. Those are the kinds of things that help drive an economy. So we're one of the few states, and we were a leader, we're one of the few states in adopting accountability for graduation. Our high schools are actually now, as part of accreditation, have to meet a graduation target. But experts say it overweights weak credentials like GEDs, underweights actually finishing high school, which, as we know, is one of those predictors for success in post-secondary. Secondly, while other states are starting to move ahead, including some of our regional competitors like Tennessee, a lot of states, including Virginia, are only seeing level progress on graduation rates. Colin Powell has a group he founded called America's Promise. They look at a number of community issues. One of the big ones is graduation rates. And then their 2012 report looking at this, they put us in the group of states making limited or no progress on addressing this issue. The issue's not, we talk about other countries and this globalization. I mentioned Tennessee. We should be worried about Tennessee, North Carolina, Maryland, Virginia, Delaware, states near us. Other states are stepping up their game. 21 states in Washington, D.C. now require all students to meet college-ready standards, which basically we use college, it's really post-secondary ready standards. 4 years of English, 4 years of math, 3 years of math, 4 years of English. We don't. Only in Virginia, if you get an advanced studies diploma, our advanced diploma, which is 46% of our graduates, are you getting that kind of preparation. Respected national organizations are giving us low marks on things like policies around school choice and charter schools, teacher effectiveness, and other kinds of initiatives. When you see these reports and you look at them, you know, we're consistently comparing unfavorably now to some other states, including, again, regional competitors. And as opposed to other states, again, including some regional competitors, we weren't competitive in the Race to the Top program. We were not even a finalist. And our application for a waiver, the No Child Left Behind law, is getting a little long in the tooth, as you may have noticed. And because of some of the stuff Senator Warner talked about, Congress has had a hard time agreeing on how to fix it. We applied for a waiver, and the Obama administration felt that the waiver wasn't ambitious enough and sent it back to us. And so we were not one of the states that has now been approved a waiver to get out from under that law. So we need to start changing our expectations. 48 states, including Virginia, helped design these common assessments and these common standards. 45 states are now working to develop common assessments through 2 different consortia. We're not. And that's okay, and I'm going to talk about that in a sec. But two independent evaluations, the American Institutes for Research and the Thomas B. Fordham Foundation, both found that our standards are not substantially superior. They're the same or not as rigorous as the Common Core. And we're having this raging debate about whether Virginia should adopt these national standards. And I think there's compelling arguments on both sides, but I would respectfully submit that debate is distracting us from just the more pertinent reality. We should just be thinking, and Virginia's leaders should be thinking, what steps are we going to take to raise our expectations and raise our standards? And to the extent we're just having this national state fight, it obscures from sort of a whole set of really more pertinent questions. So what do I mean by changing expectations? There's an assessment, it's given every year to a sample of students around the country. It's called the National Assessment of Education Progress. It's a federal assessment, very high quality, very good questions, and we also give, obviously, in the state, the SOL. You can see on 4th grade and then 8th grade over here on the right, our proficiency rates, what we consider good enough to pass the SOLs, what the NAEP considers proficiency. There's obviously a pretty substantial gap there in those expectations. The NAEP, when we talk about world-class standards, the NAEP are world-class standards. And so you can see that gap. When you unpack it, this is the slide that troubles me a lot more. So on the last administration of this test in 2011, you can see 19% of African American students were proficient on the NAEP in 4th grade, 21% of Hispanic students in reading, compared to that 39% overall. Low-income students, 17%. And then as students move through school by 8th grade, that figure for low-income students, 15% of low-income students were proficient at that world-class level by 8th grade. And this is one reason when you look around the country, and Virginia's no exception, about 8 to 9% of low-income students end up getting a college degree by the time they're 24. About 9%. That compares to about 80% of higher-income Americans. So when we talk about sort of opportunity gaps and so forth, that's what it looks like. And you can see this is sort of what fuels into it. As we talked about that issue with remedial reading and so forth, you can see how this informs it. But our way of measuring accountability and performance and saying what's good enough and what works for us, under our current system, despite those gaps and those dropout numbers, 96% of our schools are fully accredited. Fully accredited. And that's the disconnect that our leaders have to start thinking about, is how do we start to raise our expectations and address that disconnect. The public is actually quietly on our side. People are very conservative about their own schools, but they understand that there is a challenge here. There was a landmark survey last year by Achieve. People get that demands have changed, and they get that education matters more, that greater preparation is required. 89% of the public agreed to the statement that to get ahead in life, you got to have some post-secondary education. So when leaders talk about that, it shouldn't just be college. College for all sort of, I think, confuses people because it shouldn't be college for all, but post-secondary for all is very important, and people get that. People support the idea of high common or at least benchmarked standards. They want those world-class standards. They support college and career-ready graduation requirements. And when you look around the country, parents are voting with their feet when they get the chance. And in fact, in some states, you're seeing parents are actually leaving good options to go to demonstrably lower quality options, but that's a sign of just how much of the angst has been built up, and people are voting with their feet, and leaders need to be cognizant of that. So I really think we have something of a problem of you are so much better off to be a kid in Virginia than many other states, including some other states in our region, but that's allowed us into a sense of inertia, a sense of complacency about where we need to get to and how we should be thinking about this problem. So the question is what kind of action to take. We can work with other states. We can do some of these things. We can go it alone. Texas is going it alone, and it's working for them. And they're seeing gains. So the choice, again, is not this, we have to go all in with a federal or a national approach or just hold on to a state approach. The question is just what are we going to do to address this? Because what we can't do is we cannot stand still because other states are moving forward. Other states are addressing this. These are going to be competitors for jobs in industry, and standing still in that environment is basically the same thing as moving backwards. So 3 ideas that I'll close before I turn it over to Chris. 3 ideas. First of all, we need greater transparency. We need a more evidence-based conversation. Some of that data I showed you guys today, raise your hand if that's the first time you've seen some of those comparisons with world-class standards, some of those comparisons, graduation rates. We need more transparency. We need to have that kind of conversation. Senator Warner talked about metrics. We need to be starting to use a broader set of metrics and thinking and benchmarking ourselves in a much more transparent way. We need to and have a conversation about where we're succeeding. And there's a lot of success. Look at that U.S. News list of the best high schools. You'll see Virginia high schools pop up all over it. There's a lot of success, but also where we need to do better, particularly around some of these issues, some of these gaps, these tremendous disequities. We need to pay more attention to the experience of other states on issues like choice and charter schools. We are lagging behind in terms of giving parents options, creating a more customized experience for kids, meeting kids a little more where they are with different kinds of schools. Teacher effectiveness, we're lagging behind on thinking about how we evaluate teachers. And it's funny, these sectors we celebrate, tech and so forth, they've figured out how to evaluate people, and they don't do it with standardized tests. They don't do it with these sort of things that we're shedding so much blood over in education. There are lessons there, but we're still way behind on thinking about how do you really evaluate personnel to create high-performing organizations? How do you think about selection? How do you think about recruitment? We're a net exporter for Teach for America, which means some of our very best college graduates from our schools around the state, including the one we're at right now, they leave Virginia to go teach in high-poverty communities elsewhere. They go to LA, they go to the Bronx and Harlem. They go to the Rio Grande Valley on the Texas-Mexico border rather than helping us right here in Virginia in communities that are struggling. We need to get it. We shouldn't be a net exporter of teaching talent. We should be a net importer of teaching talent. And also school turnarounds. So we have a client, actually, the University of Virginia. When Senator Warner was governor, he established a turnaround initiative there. They do some really interesting work on helping low-performing schools turn around. They've had some tremendous wins in some places like Cincinnati. They're doing a lot of work out in Clark County, which is basically Las Vegas, that area. Most of their big wins and most of their work, and as I said, full disclosure, they're a client of Bellwether, it's out of the Commonwealth. We launched this thing here. It's a terrific university partnership at the University of Virginia between the Ed School and the B School there, but most of their work, they're getting on planes and they're leaving Virginia rather than really helping dig in here. That's the kind of thing we need to think about. Second, we've got to change our accountability system. Right now, to be fully accredited, the reason we have that 96%, you just got to have a certain number of the kids getting over the SOLs. 70, 75% in most cases. And high school meet a fairly moderate target for graduates. We've got to start taking into account racial subgroups, ethnic subgroups, economic subgroups, low-income kids. We cannot reward schools and say that they're fully accredited and they're doing okay when they have these big gaps and when lots of kids are being left behind. All right, popular with one person, good. And our accountability system has got to reflect that. As Senator Warner said, he likes metrics, I like metrics. We all use metrics, whether we're looking at the box scores and baseball standings, whether we're looking at things in our professional life. We've got to update our metrics for public education. And finally, I think we need a statewide education group. And when I look around the country, and this is not just the current round of reform, this is going back to earlier reforms like the Pritchard Committee in Kentucky and so forth, you really don't see ambitious, sustained reform without an independent group working on education. And the politics of it are obvious, and why you need that, and the politics of just stakeholder groups and so forth, why it gets so complicated. And you're seeing around the country all these different groups, from ones that operate in different states and have different chapters, to very state-specific groups, like one called Advanced Illinois, that sort of the handful of former governors out there who aren't in jail got together and organized this group, and it's bipartisan. Senator Frist did the same thing in Tennessee. So they can be homegrown, they can be these sort of national groups that operate in different states, but they focus just on education, and they're able to sort of focus attention on that, hold policymakers accountable. We have great groups doing work on this right now. The Chamber, one of our sponsors today, has an education committee. There's lots of good stuff, but there is no group that just does education and does it in a non-constituency based way. And so as I think about our leadership challenges, these three things, particularly this last one, and maybe there's somebody out there in this room who wants to launch that, we need some kind of a homegrown Virginia group that's just about focusing attention on what's happening or holding people accountable, particularly for these areas where we're falling short. So our plan today is Chris is going to take it away and tell you now, if I haven't bummed you out enough, she's going to tell you with the economy and sort of what some of this means. And then we want to reserve the last third of our time for you all so we can have Q&A and a conversation. So it's my pleasure to turn it over to my colleague, Chris Chumra.